Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to this 18th day of January and to this women's show. Today we want to talk about the state of human rights in Uganda. And I've constituted a panel of lawyers. I don't know how we ended up with lawyers, but mighty women in this community that can then talk about what the human rights situation is in this country. But before we do that, I want to introduce my panel, and I'll let them introduce themselves for this show. On the far right is where I will begin from, and in order, they will tell us what they're doing in their communities, how they are shaping the narratives in their communities, but most importantly, what role they are playing in making sure that the human rights situation is better in this country. I'll begin with you, Patricia. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Patricia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aima Patricia Okou. I'm a student at the Law Development Center and a member of the Network for Public Interest Lawyers, Makerere.
Yes, next to her.
Hello, everyone. Marion Kirabo, activist, women's rights activist, and feminist.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Patience Poni Ayikoru. I'm still guild speaker at Uganda Christian University, and I'm a final year student of law at the same university. I am also a founder and team leader of a community-based organization in Kovoko district, which is out to bring gender activism within West Nile and Uganda at large. Yes, thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. My name is Ruth Kitamirike. I am a student of law at Makerere University, where I also serve as the Minister for Gender. Thank you.
Exactly. And my name is Tricia Gloria Nabaye. I'm a resident research associate at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. And in their rights, they all come with something to offer to this table. I am very glad that you got a chance to introduce yourselves because your CVs are building up in ways that some of us, when we were that age, didn't do a lot. What Patience didn't tell you, and I think I want you to say, FemTalk is the organization. She said I own it, but it's called FemTalk, and it's doing a lot of work in Koboko. And so I want to begin this conversation on the state. I was reading this week on the Human Rights Watch report, the World Report. And when you look at the highlights of what Uganda was doing between 2020 to 2021 December, it builds a very grim situation of what is happening in our human rights in Uganda from the November killings. And I'm beginning with November because of the time when we were home and weren't seeing what was happening. But, you know, the teen pregnancies tell us what was happening. And the number of deaths that were happening also speak to what our health sector and the right to health looks like for us. And so they track down from quite far, but I'll begin from the November killings. And then they go into the pre-election and the post-election violence that happens. Then they talk about the issues of justice that also showed up, the arbitrary arrests, the house arrests. And so the build-up almost paints a picture of we are either going downhill and we are not having a conversation about it, or we are going downhill and we are scared to have this conversation. And that is where I find ourselves today. But to begin with you, Ruth, and this is something just to pick your brain on what do you think is our challenge as of now in Uganda in regards to our human rights issues?
Thank you so much, Patricia. The situation in Uganda is quite saddening, but what we need to know is that some of these violations that go on, this is clearly violations against the law that is stipulated, as stipulated in our laws of the country. So I feel it is a general breakdown of the rule of law in the country, that no one respects the rule of law, and that is why everyone feels it is okay to do anything the way they do it.
So there is impunity. And the impunity is building up. But then what do we do, Patience? What do we do in dealing with such a reality? Because what she speaks for not only speaks to the citizens, but also speaks to security officers, to the courts of law. What do we do to redefine the rule of law that is breaking down within our society?
Okay. Well, in addition to what Ruth said on the impunity, I think our country, its credibility is at stake. We have a lot to do. Like you said clearly, many of us are now even fearing to speak about it, or we should be able to speak about it. And the best solution, of course, to such shock responsive laws in the country, because as a nation, we have not been shock responsive enough. A lot has happened and everyone is surprised by it. The economy has fallen apart. But then it's our collective effort. The solution should be that every individual should be a part of nation building in various sectors. And to the human rights activists out there, it is our authority and will to actually be there and bring the collective effort to ensure a democratic society while also upholding the tenets of humanity in our nation. Otherwise, a state without humanity or human rights being down the drain, trust me, it's going to be a massive, massive wreck of dissolidarity within the nation, and we have to speak up. So I really uphold the organizations out there, civic space, like Center for Constitutional Governance, for actually questioning the government, to put the test to them, that the credibility of a nation is tested when there is no crisis. But when it's done during a crisis, then I think we are not being responsive enough.
And maybe just to highlight that you're an activist in your right, Marion, and Patience speaks to the collective action. A lot of times I think our struggle, and we've talked about this constantly, is that a drive will come. Right now we have a free Kankweza drive, and then it will die. But there is a narrative that needs to be dealt with, or issues that need to be dealt with in real time, even post the Kankweza period. So we need to question, how do we sustain, you know, this push for rule of law, for human rights? How do we sustain our call for accountability from our leaders? How do we do that?
I think we may not. So when I do look at Uganda's politics, I have shifted from looking at it as a one-off event, as per se, to a history of violence and how can I say, disregard of the rule of law. That in our 50 plus years of independence, this has been the order of the day since we got our independence, that every regime, and we have only had one civilian rule, that every regime after that has come in. First of all, the way the government has been ushered in, it's through violence, and therefore to maintain itself, it maintains itself through violence. So what we're faced with now is, what is haunting us is the militarization of our politics, simple like that. Because the military state, the biggest tool it has to continue to hold on to power is violence. And therefore, it cannot sustain itself without perpetrating violence. And for me, it's not even the 2021 election. I think it's every election that has happened. Perhaps the elections I have seen in my lifetime are the ones under Museveni's regime, and I will tell you that none of them has been peaceful. But also we have seen the crudeness of the state. I wouldn't say just on the 2021 election, but even 2020, we saw how pregnant women were treated. That a police officer or a soldier comes and beats up a pregnant woman because she's being taken to the hospital, apparently. Or there is a curfew, or there is a complete lockdown, you should not be in your house. So you're risking the life of a pregnant woman. And you're not making even exceptions.
And in critical times.
In the critical time, in emergencies, we're not looking at that. That you're enforcing a law without even caring about how it's affecting people's lives. And we do not have statistics of how many pregnant women actually lost their lives because of that, or how many lost their babies. We do not know the numbers. All we see is the few people that were caught on TV. So your question is, how do we sustain these campaigns? I think the problem that we have is that we tackle the issue at hand, and then we forget about the military state completely. You get, it's today it's Kakwenza, and then we have forgotten the Muslim clerics that are imprisoned.
Yeah.
Today it's Kakwenza, and then we have forgotten Sewanyana and Sejunya behind bars. You see, today it's Kakwenza, or tomorrow. Today it's Kakwenza, but tomorrow it will be the traffic officer who was shot by the UPDF. So we look at them as one-offs. You know, let us handle it as it comes, and we forget about the bigger picture, the militarization of our politics. Until we have a campaign to tackle the military state and uproot it and find ways on how we can replace it with a civilian state, because it's only a civilian state that will respect human rights.
I think that's a whole overhaul of the system.
Yes, you need an overhaul of the system, or you continue with your one-off. It ends today when you feel that you have, and the problem with us is that we feel that there is no progress. Then you'll be like, okay, we have tried our best, let's just go home. That is how Sejirinya and Sewanyana are still behind bars. And when we're making so much noise, release you! Yes. And now that we feel like, okay, they have now been brought before trial, let's wait for the trial date, and it will end there.
And I think that is a conversation patients try to push us in on shock responsiveness. Patricia, I want to bring you in there.
Yes.
And for lack of a better word, we laugh at our own pain. But in the words of Spire, these things would have killed us if we didn't laugh about them. And so I want to bring us to that conversation. She says a very important thing of the lack of sustenance in these things is because there is always something to be worried about in Uganda. That's a truth.
Treatment is simple.
While you're dealing with this, you're like, okay, this has also happened. Now, how do we deal with this? So how do we, especially in being shock responsive, but then also in being able to sustain and deal with the root causes? She speaks of a military state. And I'm imagining violence is a language. So they will use violence to communicate that things have changed. Today I went to town and everywhere there was military. They were moving everywhere. And for some reason I wasn't wondering. I was like, is there something going to happen? Is there a riot? And so there is this continued feeling of fear. And it's a language military states use. But then how do we come to a place where we can then now start to be aware, but not just to be aware, but then to deal with these things as they happen and after they happen? Because I'm worried Segirinya and Kakwenza will rot in jail because along the way we stopped to care, but then also these things no longer shock us. How do we deal with that bit? Where the care, it seems like Ugandans are sleeping, they need to be awakened. How are we going to awake them?
Thank you, Patricia. Looking at the current state of affairs, we can see that people actually have the ideas of how to tackle these things, but putting the ideas into play. Will you get crucified for putting your idea out there, or will you be allowed to move on with your idea? That is where the issue comes around. State actors, for instance, the judiciary and security agencies, can be trained on how to tackle these different things, how to respond to different scenarios. And then after training, they can go ahead and put what they've learned into the field. But then again, will they put what they've learned into the field? That is another question we ask ourselves. Then you can see that so many organizations have come up, activists have come up, they've talked about all the negative, the impact of the activities of state actors, their negative impact on the people of Uganda. People have come up, they've been active about it, talked about how it has affected the lives of people. Research has been done, but not in detail, because you never know what happened to the mother deep down in the village. You never know whether she was able to access health care, or she was able to move from one place to another in case of an emergency in the middle of the night during the curfew, or whether she was injured during the 2020 election violence. We never know. Most of the statistics come from places we know. Basically, there is no, how do I say it? I think it's service delivery. It is not really there. It's only at the top. You only get the cream. No one gets to know what happens inside there. No one gets, no one, and you find that nothing is done about all those victims who have gone through everything, all the negatives.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that is it.
And that speaks to invisible numbers. While we were speaking on service delivery, something came to my mind, and I'm going to come to you, Ruth, as Minister of Gender, because it's a conversation we've had constantly on this show on dealing with issues of education, especially for girls.
Yeah.
And as the week happened, there was a narrative of the state house needing renovation, and then schools that look like they will fall to in any second.
Yeah.
You know, not being considered. I mean, there was no urgency in dealing with issues of, you know, renovation or in order to give a service called education, which is also a right.
Which is a right.
And so, how do we marry, you know, state responsiveness to dealing with issues that Ugandans are facing, and you know the reality as it's happening? Because I would imagine, especially as Minister of State is also our First Lady, that this conversation should have been happening by October or even at the beginning of this year, that let's now start to renovate so that, you know, children can then access. But I looked at the images of children in school, and as much as they're getting an education, they're barely getting anything. They were squeezed, the classes were depleted. So priorities, how do we deal with the randomness of our priorities, or even the shock therapy our priorities give?
It is carrying on from where Patricia stopped and now to you, Tricia. It is a very sorry state that we are in. When she was actually saying something about service delivery, I remembered last year I was part of a baseline survey by Plan. They were carrying out a survey on a project they want to start, which is the She Leads project. And She Leads is seeing how we can involve young girls, teenage girls in school in places of leadership. So I was posted to Kamuli district to go in the very deep sub-counties of Kamuli to carry out this survey. And seeing the perspectives and what these people have to go through. These were girls in the lockdown. They'll tell you here at home, they do not care about us. When you go to the health center, they're going to say, you girl, you do not have a lot of things to do, so let's give services to the man. So you find that this mentality that even people who are in places of service delivery are carrying, it is something that they are carrying from the top. So we have seen how priorities change, and priorities are hinged on very minor things. So where we have a First Lady as Minister for Education, we wouldn't be having a debate of whether to renovate State House or to work on schools that...
Her house needs to be looking nice.
It gets back to the patriotism these people are teaching us. If you are here to serve a country, I really doubt if they are here to serve a country, because they knew that schools must open. Exactly. I believe everyone would have used the lockdown period to renovate some of these schools, to work on some of these issues. Recently, I was looking at a letter from a certain school in Entebbe, and they were calling old students to pick their slips because the school is going to close. And these are some of the few schools we know about. There are many we do not know about. Schools have closed, some announced, some unannounced. So it worries me where young people are going to be, the future of this nation.
If education is still the answer.
If education is actually still the answer. Funny videos have been going on of children who are now selling masks on streets, selling many things, and they're struggling very hard with their parents to take them back to school. So how are you going to convince a child to go back to school if even the government does not care about making sure that the environment you're sending them back to is conducive enough for them? So it worries me that even when patriotism falls under Ministry of Education, we do not see that anywhere in this country. They don't care about us.
Which they should.
Well, they should be.
They should. And let me begin into this conversation because you deal with girls. And I was watching the news, and the news is not a fun thing these days to watch. Between fires in schools and children that have been forced to stay and they're not going to access education. Then it brings us to the conversation that we've had constantly, and I need answers because I feel like I'm not getting the answers of, do we then start to have an honest conversation on the right to education to the girls that ended up pregnant from the lockdown? How do we deal with this narrative? And hear me out, because to be politically correct, the ideal would be that they go back because it's their right to education.
Yeah.
But have we created systems within these schools to rehabilitate them, to provide for their mental health, to provide for their maternal needs? Because I'm imagining between food, they must be tired sometimes. To reimagine the curriculum for such children, how do we deal with that, especially for them to realize their right to education?
Okay. Well, before responding to that question, I just wanted to add to what Ruth had stated about the issue of priorities. I think in a nation, like I said earlier, a state's credibility is only measured before even a crisis. But then when a crisis comes and you're trying to prove a point, it doesn't make sense because the crisis pushed you to it.
Yes.
And bad reputation of a government is impinged in its credibility.
Yeah.
So all these stakeholders, the activists like Marion here and others out there watching, are doing a good job to do the checks and balances to ensure that the government is put accountable to whatever thing they're supposed to do, because it's their duty to provide services, and the people's duty is to actually make the government accountable to them. That is why I stress the point of having a democratic society where citizens can actually be heard and have influence in who and how they should be governed in a state. So the issue of talks on State House being renovated, while I was coming from Arua, I saw a very bad school. Like, it looked so bad. And I feel like it's not just even those in the government offices to blame, but it streams across the whole hierarchy up to the lowest level.
The institutions themselves.
Yes, the institutions. I'm told they're actually given money to renovate in the rural areas. They're given money to do this and that, but it might be little money, but then also, how are you accountable as an individual to get that money and go and, I don't know, cut grass around the school and prepare it? So there's a lot that goes on, and these checks and balances have to be upheld highly. And then secondly, getting back to the issue of the girls, I feel like as a state, we were never ready for this at all, because the states where girls actually go to school even when pregnant are very ready for that. It takes me to a point of the schools that we talk about that are given by government, and they say it's free education. No, it's not free. Children pay money to go to these schools. So it could be maybe said as it's subsidized education, because at the end, some people still with that little money cannot afford to go to school. They end up living out, you know, the rest of the other citizenry, because poverty is a big problem in Uganda, which has to be worked on with financial balance and equity in the nation. So for these girls, it gets back to their individual choices. Are they willing to go to school, having been given this right? But then even then, of course, most of them are willing to go to school. But the environment, starting from the mindset of the parents, the border stages, the neighbors, the community, the school, exactly, the classmates, the school environment, Ugandans are not ready. Even if it's not expressly said,
I mean, the clergy
but
said
it's
they shouldn't return.
Exactly. So see that? So it's both express and implied that most of us, even in our minds, were thinking, you're seeing a pregnant girl going to school in uniform, and you're going to say, this one also.
She's going to influence our girls.
Exactly. So, and then it also gets to the question of when we let some of the girls now continue going that way within the school they were before, won't it make the rest also be free to get pregnant anytime, thinking that, yes, I'll actually go back after all after this? Or should there be, it brings us to questions of, should there be a school specifically for these girls, for the pregnant girls, but even the facilities of the ones who are very okay, who are not yet pregnant, are wanting. So I don't know how ready we are, but it takes us back to the scale of preferences as those in the government offices. I'm sure some of us here will actually be there, and we are going to be questioned when we reach there. But as we are young here, we have the platforms to put them accountable. We need to spread the message and show State House being renovated and a school. We need to put them on pressure. Yes, those in office will think we are looking at them badly, but we're doing our role as citizens, and we're really trying to actually save the image of the whole nation. It's an act of patriotism.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. You actually reminded me of John Pombe Magufuli and that story, the trend of pregnant girls shouldn't be in school. That was very sticky, but looking at it from, until it happens in your backyard, it never really makes sense. But it's a very, very sticky conversation to have.
By reality.
Marion, I want to drag you into digital rights, because as a country, that is something now we are dealing with. But most importantly, that because the past 2 years have taught us how the interconnectedness of the internet has made us more close than even the regular meetings. I mean, I can Skype you, I can Zoom you, I can do any other video call and still have this feel of, I've seen you this week. But with that also has come an abuse, because most probably we also don't know how to deal with this kind of freedom or the right to, access internet. And the internet has been created as a human right now. But how do we deal with the sticky parts of offensive communication, access to internet, because when the poor don't even have it, it's already taxed with a 12% tax. And these are the things that happened as between OTT, the social media blackout, and then schools happening online, also work being shifted online. Digital rights then became something that we need to start to look at very differently, but then also to protect. So how do we, 2022 unfolding before us with the Kakweza offensive communication case, with the previous Stella Nyanzi offensive communication case, but then also with the fact that it is more important now to, safeguard digital rights. How do we have this conversation without, stepping on people's toes, but then also with also protecting our individual rights, especially us as activists as well, and also as people that use it to exercise, different freedoms of expression and assembly.
Allow me to tackle two things. I will talk about digital rights, but I wanted to add the whole conversation about teenage mothers. Let me start with digital rights. Across the continent, and recently I just saw Nigerians celebrating about how Twitter has been opened up. Was it, I think this week or a few days ago in their country? And it made me reflect, actually, this is just not a Ugandan issue. It's like in every African continent, almost every African continent. Well, ever since the Arab Spring, I think that the view towards internet changed from the Arab Spring and with the use of Facebook to mobilize people all around the world. It also became more evident that the internet could actually be used for so many things, especially to bring people together on a scale that on a global scale, unlike, where you send out flyers and maybe you're only able to mobilize, but this platform could mobilize people from all over the world,
even internationally and locally.
So I think to most dictators it was like, okay, so it's not about us shutting down newspapers anymore, or it is not about us censoring radios and TV. Now there is this thing that is privately owned. We can't touch it because Twitter is not in our countries, Facebook is not in our countries, so we just can't go up much to their office and say,
close
up. You get it also took them time to even figure out ways, because even when they were like, okay, let's shut down your service providers in our country, people are still using VPN to access it. So it made them think, oh my God, okay, so what are we going to do with this beast called the internet? It has just come to turn our lives upside down. So that's when you see countries having internet shutdowns, and then when you see them increasing taxes on internet and maybe regulating basically regulating who gets to it. There were some laws that they passed. I don't know if they passed, of, let me say, service providers on the internet. There are some regulations, like I don't remember
My sticky one is the offensive communication bill.
Now that's so to the offensive communication bill. Of course, it's part of the regulation that the government uses to curtail freedoms of speech, freedom of association and assembly. Because we see, like I took you to those, because even in Uganda, you would say, oh, but Uganda, but you saw in 2021 elections how we use the internet to bring out the violence of the state and the brutality of the state. Most of the people who were gunned down were caught on camera, live bullets being shot. People were able to picture in real time.
Enough to create a documentary.
Exactly, the BBC documentary. And And the government has never given a counter narrative to that. They claim that these
Yeah.
people who were gunned down were bandits and all that. But hey, the civilians have evidence that you're actually a brutal regime. You do not have evidence that the civilians were trying to have some sort of coup d'etat or take over. You get? So if we were, if let me say one day Museveni is brought before the ICC, there's already documented evidence against him and regime brutality. You get me? So I think, to me, if I was a dictator, that's my worst nightmare, and I would try to make sure that I control.
I'm going to pause you there and pick your brain again on that, but most importantly on how then do we deal with issues of access to justice, and do we actually need to, repeal our constitution and create something that makes sense for us now? But we're going to take a break and then be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As you're aware, we were trying to, have a sticky conversation on, do we need to have this 1995 constitution reviewed, repealed, and have a new one in 2022 or in the years to come? But before we went for the break, we were having a conversation. And Marion, I left you, stressing a point on what then do we do? I forget what you were doing, but what then do we do for the current issues that are happening within our systems? I want to pick you up on that, and then you will begin us on that constitution conversation, Trish.
Okay. Perhaps let me just roll it up in one. You see, for most of the issues that we have today, unfortunately for us, and even if you're to talk about overhaul of the constitution, even if you're to talk about, let us say, let us get rid of the rot in the judiciary. Let's make sure that there's accessibility to justice. One thing that when you're having this conversation, you cannot isolate them from political goodwill, and you cannot isolate them from the government under which you are. Unfortunately for us, our political system is organized in this one-man or a group of people kind of system that only their interests are what is advanced in that political system. And as long as anything is against their interests, if let me say anyone is against the NRM agenda or NRA agenda or the Museveni agenda, you are not allowed to thrive. Your laws will not be allowed to thrive, no matter how good they are for society and all that. So until you get rid of that, until you deconstruct that political system, and I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't have all the answers. But what I know is that you need to get rid of it, because it doesn't matter how many presidents you change. But if you cannot destroy it from its roots, you won't be able to have, without good political will, you won't be able to have these conversations, and you won't be able to put in place the laws that are able to allow this to reign. I'll take, for example, Kenya. At least in the East African countries we are looking at Kenya is developing at a very fast rate, but part of that is also, it is more democratic now, that even the judicial system can be able to challenge an election.
Even the electoral system is independent.
Now, the reason for that is that perhaps their forefathers, unlike ours, were more willing to create a more transitional government. Of course, there were times of Arap Moi, which were very dictatorial and very, how can I say, very brutal. A lot of people were imprisoned, killed, persecuted during that time. But they were able to transition from that as a country and look at and come together. Different political actors. You saw the Kenyattas, the Rutos coming. These political actors coming. Okay, we need to fashion a Kenya that works for us and get this guy out of
Kenya
power.
we want.
A Kenya that we want. So let us all come together. Forget about our tribal differences, but come together and make sure we get this person out of power. And after that, we can have a a set of laws, you know, as that can help us transition into a more democratic state. You get?
It makes sense.
So I don't know how we as a country can come to that point and say, okay, there's this system, there's this Musevenism that is going on. Let us come together and deconstruct it, you know? So that kind of transition, or what you called maybe shock therapy and what, we need to come. I thought it would come with the people power movement, but we have started to see cracks in that. But I haven't given up. But maybe there will be another movement that will come, and this time we'll get it right.
Yeah.
But that needs to happen. So we can talk about how we can do our small things as activists, but it will only be a drop in the ocean.
Exactly.
Unless we get other political players on the same table with us, which I thought was going to happen in 2021.
Someone said the more things change, the more they look the same.
Yes.
Patricia, let me bring you here. Because she says something that, especially in regard to political will and what we are doing as a country. At the beginning of this year, we had a conversation on the parliamentary way of electing our presidents, and I was in shock. This time the shock worked. I was like, I wasn't surprised, but I was shocked. I'm like, this, lo and behold, is now happening. So it's a narrative that, you know, is far off our democratic practices, but not new to us. It has ever happened in the Kavakaeka UPCDP time, the Obote time. But do we really need a parliamentary way of electing our president, even now that we failed to change one in a constant of elections that have happened? Democratic as they are assumed. But then also, it also brings me to the conversation of what then do we deal with the 1995 Constitution? Is it still relevant to the conversations we are having today? And if we were to think of a review, would it work for the people?
Thank you, Patricia. Looking at the 1995 Constitution, we know it's the supreme law of the land. But is it really the supreme law of the land? There are other state actors who are way above it. Amendments are happening all the time, starting with, let's say, the term limits. I think that was 2003. The term limits, they were just lifted just like that. Then we had multi-party systems introduced to cover up, you have term limits have been removed. Let's bring multi-party systems such that other people who intend to stand for presidency can stand. And then we're so excited. Yes, they have brought multi-party systems, but we had forgotten that term limits were removed. As she said, a transitional government, that's where it started from, the departure from it. Then again, we had removal of age limits. Removal of age limits was done while opposition was still in power. So when you say the parliament the parliamentary elections are yet to come into play, is it really going to work in the best interest of the public? Because while opposition was in parliament, age limit was lifted. So what role is opposition going to play in parliamentary elections? Is it going to play a big role? Is it going to put people's ideas out there in the parliament? Yes. So with regard to reviewing the Constitution, to some extent, it is still very, very, very important to us. Though to another extent, it's quite vague. Looking at, for instance, freedom of expression, the law provides that, yes, you have the freedom of expression. It doesn't really state the extent to which your freedom is available. And then it paves way for the construction of other acts like Computer Misuse Act. You see Section 25 on offensive communication. It is so vague, and it is used by, you find that when an offensive communication has happened, most of the people affected are those in office, in a public
and maybe
office.
On that very point, I need you just to talk about the right to offend.
The right to offend.
Because it's part of, freedom of expression. It's there. It hinges on freedom of expression. But then the narrative of, curtailing dissent in our need to be expressive of the things that, to be critical of government. How do we protect, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, without, you know, that push for offensive communication and surveillance, you know, all the other atrocities that come from the fact that I have said something.
Thank you. In a democratic society, we have those who are going to go with the current political affairs and those who are going to go against it.
Yeah.
Creating a room for freedom, for people to freely express themselves, people to freely think and say out what is on their minds. Creates a space where people are able to critique the government on whatever avenues they have gone wrong. Yes, so that brings us to the right to offend.
Yeah.
The right to offend. You see, in our society, we are governed by people from different backgrounds. Yes, we have tribalistic views and societal views, but these are also affected by religious views.
Yeah.
Religious views, just like how we see our religious leader claiming that pregnant girls should not go back to school. That those who are so strong on religion will be like, yes, they cannot go back to school. But while we claim that we have a right to say what is on our mind, how does it impact on those around you? How does it protect the public space around you? Is it going to incite violence? Is it not going to incite violence? So while there is the right to offend, you have to do it to a certain extent. I think Article 43 provides for the limitation on the freedom of expression, and you have to do so in the interest of the public, protect public order. Yes, that is basically
Maybe what I can add is that perhaps the yardstick, at least for us lawyers, is that what is just in what is acceptable in a just and democratic society. The reason the yardstick is quite different for especially public figures. The thing is that you occupy a public office.
Exactly.
And therefore, unlike a private citizen, people are allowed to critique you because you sought to serve the society that you live in. So there is, of course, like she said, it has limitations. The freedom of expression has limitations. But those limitations are based on, and in the case of Charles Onyongo, in Uganda it was decided what is acceptable in a free and democratic society. So those in public office are allowed to be criticized because they serve the public. And also the reason why it is important to protect this right is so that people feel that they have an avenue through which to express themselves. That you don't want to live in a society where you have blocked every means of expression, and then there is tension boiling under, and people feel because they have no way to really tell their own side of the story and show you how what you're doing affects them, eventually they lash out. So even when we're talking about the exceptions being hate speech or being what do they call it? I'm forgetting it. Libel and defamation. When it comes to offensive speech, also, like let me say vulgarity and offensiveness. Like I would ask, are you going to imprison everyone else who calls you a pig? You know, and then what? You know, morality is so different. The gravities of how people feel.
I don't want to go in a drone.
So it becomes so. I don't think that would be the yardstick of a free and just society. And because I called Tricia fat, suddenly I'm going to spend, let me say, 5 years in prison. Not 5 months, even if it's just
the
1 day.
torture chambers.
You get. So you need to look at that what Kakweza did. Does it justify you to imprison someone? Really, would you live in a society where you're imprisoning everyone that abuses you? But also a public office.
Exactly.
You are a president.
You're a security
You need to have
officer.
a threshold of being able of criticism. You get that you should take in things because the people voted you.
Exactly.
So they kind of have a right
maybe to pick on what she's saying,
Yes.
it also speaks to access to justice. Today we are having this conversation, but there've been a stalemate in our access to justice or to the role of the courts of law in this country. You're all going to be practicing lawyers at some point. I hope so. Please get those degrees. Finish LDC. So in your practice, and this is where I am worried. Today we're having a conversation at office, and the person said it would be very, very, very unheard of if actually the state did what was right in the case of Kakweza. Got the defense and then got them there. It would be very shocking because the narrative that they've created is that even access to justice is a fallacy now. So you have people that have been given right to bail and they still don't get bail. They're in prison to this day. But then you have a precedent also in the Kakweza's case where his defense is not even there. How do we deal with the sticky points in access to justice that are unveiling before our very eyes? Do they create a precedent to a narrative where I think a one-man's law then takes precedent, or to the whims of the touch-me-nots?
I think it still gets back to the impunity that is in this nation. We have had many episodes of scenarios in this country where a court will release someone on bail and immediately drones will come and they arrest this person. We've seen what happened with the Kakwenza case. Firstly, Machindie Court Division orders that Kakwenza be released, and everyone defies this order, and yet we know who is holding Kakwenza. So we find that even when in a democratic society where constitutionalism prevails, you would say we have three arms of government that are independent, that the doctrine of separation of powers. But we do not see this in this nation. We know that the judiciary is not independent as they should be. Actually, I agree, we would be very surprised if the state did the right thing with Kakwenza. So I feel, again, it goes back to a total overhaul of a system, because there is nothing much a judge is going to do if a judge is given a template of what the judgment has to look like. There is an order from above. So I feel it gets back to the entire system. I do not know if we young people who are getting into these spaces are ready to defy some of these norms, but I feel that is what we are meant to do, because it is a major system issue that we have in this country, that even when court says something, no one is going to listen if the order is not from above.
Patience, speak for us for the future as we close this conversation. What can we do different? But then also reimagine for us a possibility if things were working, and if systems were working and human rights were being upheld. Most probably, maybe imagine for me an utopia over Uganda that I would be able, to. So where do we go from here? And how do we retrace our steps back, to a better, just society, or to a society that has a semblance of dealing with the issues that matter? How do we go there?
Okay, well, as I respond to your question, I just want to draw across to what Marion had stated on the right to offend. You see, it takes us back to, even if it's not just Kakwenza's case, yes? Because these things have happened before. This is not the first time it's happening. And the fact that also Marion mentions that in Uganda, we take things so lightly. Yes, we look like we are fighting, but once we feel like we are almost at the finish line, we quit. Or when we feel like things are not working, we quit. But I want to give credit to the gentleman that led the medical intern strike. They got results without so much violence here and there, but then they got results. He should probably teach us how to do that more and to be more resilient. It was actually a lady. Yes, a lady who worked with him.
Just came
and made the noise.
The head of the interns was a woman.
So you see, all that kind of resilience that is there should be an inspiration to the youth. But then when you talk about the right to offend, as she mentions it, she brings out the three-part test in the Charles Onyango case of the things that we have to consider, even when limiting, because the Constitution provides for the limitation, but then there are limitations to this limitation. Because if you're limiting my right, there has to be a limit to the way you're limiting my right. And this is brought in that issue of the right to offend. We see it in the Regina case, which was cited in Stella Nyanzi case, whereby they speak about the right to offend has to come out in a way that the person who is offending is saying it out with this much influence, with the mindset of corrupting the people that will actually respond to what he's saying. But then we have seen all these scenarios, and I'm not going to mention any because most of us know these scenarios and really see that there is no leeway to justice. The question of the access to justice point comes in there. In the US, their First Amendment makes this right so abstract that it even provides that yes, you have the freedom of expression and even the freedom of the right to offend, but it's also going to be curtailed under the law. But in Uganda, our laws are so vague. They are ambiguous. Yes? Look at what Patricia is talking about, the constitution. Our constitution dates back to 1967, where we had our first constitution. But then now we see so many articles contradicting each other. We have the Computer Misuse Act there. We have, yes, the freedom of expression. There's a limitation to it. They don't provide us how the limitation is being limited. All these precedents are being set by laws or courts of law, which are also not abstractly independent. So there's a lot to be done. First, within the systems, like we have said, the checks and balance have to be there. The civil society should not quit, because without them, trust me, the people or even the government itself is going to be derailed. Their credibility is going to be questioned. I want to talk about what Abraham Lincoln states, that it's better when you keep silent and then you're thought as a fool than to speak and yet you're actually going to double-side yourself. Exactly. So we have to speak up. Silence should not be our weapon. I think even this generation, I'm so happy 78% is youthful in Uganda. So there's a lot we need to do. Like Marion said, we need to stick there. We need to be steadfast and ensure these things come to pass. Let's not end at the online justice things that we're trying to look at. Even with talks of going into e-justice systems, how ready are we as a whole nation? So even as we talk about the new these concepts of right to offend or the freedom of expression, I want to say that the laws in Uganda are really ambiguous. We need to have them direct and straightforward, and we need to stop having laws that are always being changed, like without particular reason. Yes, laws have to be dynamic, but then how you bring it up should be equitable, should be demonstrably justifiable, acceptable by right-thinking members of the society, not just out of partisan and individualistic reasons because, yes, I'm there, I'm here for the money, so I'm working for myself or for the whole family and the village at large. No, we need to do this as service delivery. So I just want to end with the whole thing of seeing a collective society full of collective efforts, non-partisan, patriarchal systems need to be crushed. We need to think openly and stop thinking that if I think this way, I think I'm being feminist and I don't want to be attached to that. No, we need to be objective to the way we reason so that we avoid such cases of having our laws being pushed down the drain and looking like a joke. Yes, we laugh a lot, but trust me. Exactly, we look like a joke. We laugh a lot about these serious things, but trust me, it is satirical. We are laughing, but while pointing out the reality.
Exactly.
Yes.
Ladies, I have a few minutes on my hands, and most probably just what I want us to do is, wind down in 1 or 2 minutes, what your commitments are, you want to pushing for, the uphold of human rights, but then also what in your small contribution to, to the women's movement, what you're going to do different when we live here. If you want to go and do freak and coins, I'll be with you.
Before I do that, and I hope I'll be able to do everything in 2 minutes, I like I said, I wanted to talk about teenage pregnancies, and perhaps my contribution is also, I'm really passionate about that because I feel, I think after doing a course on gender and the law, I realized how there is so much gender bias in everything that we do, the laws, even the most minute things that we think are not. And I think this conversation all about teenage pregnancies has made me realize even in the education system, there's a lot of gender bias, because when someone has a conversation of saying that that these young pregnant girls are going to teach other girls immorality, I start to question, okay, is it the idea of of pregnancy that is immoral, okay, even if we were to talk about the fact that, okay, maybe the idea is not immoral in itself, but a young girl getting pregnant, is it that we do not live in societies where teenagers get pregnant? You get, because these girls that you're taking to school live in this same community. If a statistic is coming out that, let me say 80% of school-going girls in Kitgum get pregnant, that means just a stone throw away in the next neighborhood, this girl already knows someone who is a teenage mother.
Yes.
You get. So they live in a society of teenage mothers. So you think that, okay, so if they go to their homes in their communities already, they're teenage mothers. What difference does it make when they're sitting with teenage mothers in their class? But also, if you're talking about, let me say, bad mothers and immorality, you are not able. How much are we able to protect our children in this time and era? I mean, my 14-year-old or 13-year-old sibling at home knows more than I knew about sex at their age. You get. So the immorality that you're talking about, I promise you, it's not from the pregnant before it comes from the teenage pregnancy. It is from everywhere, whether it's movies, whether it's the songs they watch, whether it is what they read in books. You get that, and they're everywhere. So the immorality is everywhere, and so I just look at how the fact that the conditioning of fear about the sexualization of women and even young girls, but then you allow it to grow, you allow the objectification of women to grow, but you do not give these girls any safeguards to protect themselves, or you do not even try to remove the objectification, because it all comes from there. If we go and look at these cases, most of the perpetrators, the father of these children, are actually older, above 18 and above. It's only a few cases where it's peer-to-peer. I'm not saying it's not there, but most of these cases are defilement cases. So if we were to reimagine the step, for me, that would be like, how do we break down these patriarchal biases in all the policies that we enact, even in the education system? We have a policy on free pads in secondary schools, primary schools, that has never been implemented. We were supposed to implement a sex education policy. It was not implemented because still these things, these patriarchal biases and gender biases, the girls are supposed to protect themselves from a society that is hostile and violent. You get, and you're doing nothing to make it more suitable.
And the teen pregnancy is a revelation that they are not actually able to do it on their own.
For me, my commitment is to contribute to that campaign. Girls have a right to an education, and then we have to put pressure. Now that we have seen the repercussions of not teaching our children about sex, can we pass the sex education policies? Let it be there. Let's teach kids about sex. Let us have contraceptives in schools. Yes. And let us
teach the boys as well.
Yes.
This conversation should
not be in isolation. So let us do away with the patriarchy. Down with the patriarchy.
Before the drone picks me. Patricia,
thank you.
Reimagine for us the future.
Thank you.
And what's your commitment?
The future, let's first reimagine the future. I'd imagine a future where we have a comfortable democratic society, where governments and persons in power are open to criticism. They are broad-minded. They are welcoming of all their shortcomings. They take note of where they have gone wrong and do something about it, not just be like, oh, I realized that, oh my God, the shootings were wrong, and then you don't act after the fact. Yes, that is what I reimagine. Then also, I think my focus would be on creating an environment where people can freely explore their thoughts, put them out there without fear of being arrested. Basically, freedom of expression after speech. That is basically it.
Thank you very much. Minister of Gender. Please reimagine for us the future after here, and what's your commitment?
Thank you so much. My sisters have reimagined the future in line with civic societies, the spaces we are in. I would love to focus mine on education. I would love to see a Uganda where everyone freely goes to school, everyone can benefit from quality education. We have SDGs, but I don't know the track of Uganda in as regards to realizing quality education. So a future where girls can comfortably access this education, all parts of education in its entirety, that education can create a holistic person. As a student in Makerere, where both female and male students can enjoy studying in this university and they can freely succeed from this university, not one being asked for sex before their marks can be released, but something that is fair for everyone. And this is my commitment, that I'm, as a minister, as a student leader in the university, I'm committed to ensuring that girls, female and male students can enjoy the academic space of Makerere University, and that we do not keep quiet about some of these things, because even when it's a general national issue, women suffer more whenever impunity prevails. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I can't add to this conversation because I feel like we've exhausted it. But what I can say is that constantly human rights make our society. If we have a working system of human rights being upheld, but then also of the fight to justice being, adhered to, then we can reimagine or have a society that protects all of us as citizens. We've spoken of collective action. I need you to go out there, push, make the call hard that we need to fight for our human rights, but then also we need to uphold them. Thank you for joining us this Tuesday afternoon. I've been glad to have you. Please continue this conversation. Like, subscribe to our Civic Space TV, and see the products that keep coming back. Thank you, and bye-bye from us.